The rain in Seattle at 2 in the morning doesn't sound like rain. It sounds like static, like a television channel broadcasting nothing but cold, gray noise. I was lying in a narrow bed in the emergency room, listening to that static against the window, trying not to scream. The doctor had just told me I was bleeding internally. A ruptured cyst. Surgery was mandatory, and it was happening within the hour. The pain was a white-hot wire twisting through my abdomen, but my mind was remarkably clear. I needed someone to watch the twins. Liam and Lucas were asleep at a neighbor's house, but she had work in 4 hours. I needed my family. I called my mother first. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with irritation, not sleep. "Mom," I whispered, gripping the thin hospital sheet. "I'm in the E.R. I need surgery. Can you come for the boys?" There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where I expected concern. Instead, I heard a sigh. "Sophia, really?" she said. "We have the Yacht Club Gala tomorrow. The centennial. We've had these VIP tickets for months. We need our rest." I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the water stains. Rest. They needed rest for a party. I needed surgery to stop bleeding. "Is that a no?" I asked, my voice flat. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "Call a service. We can't be exhausted for the Commodore. It's a networking event, Sophia." The line went dead. I didn't have time to process the rejection before my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Alexa, don't ruin this for them, Sophia." It's the social event of the season. That was it. That was the verdict. My life, my children's safety, measured against a gala ticket, and found wanting. The pain in my stomach was nothing compared to the sudden, icy clarity that washed over me. The static outside stopped being noise. It became a signal. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I set the phone on the plastic side table. The screen went black, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. A normal person might have shattered right then. A normal daughter might have panicked, called back, begged them to understand the gravity of internal bleeding. But I wasn't a normal daughter anymore. I was a liability they had just tried to liquidate. Tears felt like a waste of hydration. I didn't shed a single one. I reached for my purse. My movements were slow, precise, calibrated by the pain in my abdomen. I opened my banking app. There it was. The scheduled transfer for the 1st of the month. $3,000. For 3 years, ever since my husband Mark died, I had been sending my parents $3,000 a month. They called it helping out. They said it was because the condo fees at the marina were rising, because inflation was hard on retirees. I had believed them. I had believed that family supports family. But as I stared at that number, the math finally resolved itself in my head. It wasn't support. I had been paying rent for the privilege of being their daughter. I had been paying a monthly subscription fee for their affection, and I had just discovered that the terms of service did not include emergency maintenance. To them, love wasn't an emotion. It was a transaction. I was an asset when I was silent and solvent, and a liability when I was sick. They calculated my worth based on my utility, and right now, I was useless to them. They had done the math. A gala ticket was worth more than my safety. My life was a line item they were willing to cut to balance their social calendar. Fine. If love was a transaction, I was closing the account. The transfer button turned gray under my thumb. Cancelled. Next came the recurring payments tab. Gone. Then I opened my contacts. Mom, Dad, Alexa, block, block, block. It took less than 2 minutes. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel afraid. I felt lighter. The pain in my stomach was still there, sharp and demanding. But the heavy, suffocating weight that had been pressing on my chest since Mark's funeral, that was gone. I lay back against the pillows as the nurse came in to prep me for surgery. She looked at me with pity, seeing a woman alone in the middle of the night. She didn't know. She didn't know that for the first time in years, I wasn't alone. I was free. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was clean. It was the sound of a contract being voided. Recovery gives you a lot of time to think. Lying in the hospital bed for 3 days, waiting for my incisions to knit back together. I didn't watch television. I watched the movie of my life playing on the back of my eyelids. I replayed the last decade, but this time, I watched it with the sound off. I looked at the actions, not the words. I remembered the day my father, Richard, came to me 5 years ago. He sat at my kitchen table, wringing his hands, looking small and defeated. He told me he'd made a mistake, a bridge game that got out of hand. He needed $17,000, or he was going to lose his boat. The boat was his identity. It was how he fit in at the marina. Losing it would have been a social death sentence. I paid it. I drained my savings account, the money Mark and I had put aside for a down payment on a house, and I wired $17,000 to his creditor. He didn't say thank you. He said, "You're a good girl, Sophia. You know how to take care of family." Then there was Alexa. My sister, the aspiring actress who never quite booked the role. I paid for her headshots. I paid for her acting classes in Los Angeles for 2 years. She has a gift, my mother would tell me. We have to invest in her gift. I was the investor. They were the management team taking the credit. And then there was Mark. Mark was the only person in my life who looked at me and didn't see a credit limit. He saw me. He used to hold my hand when I wrote those checks, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles. "They're eating you alive, Soph," he'd say. "They're eating you piece by piece. And they're not even hungry. They're just gluttonous." I defended them then. I said they were family. I said they needed me. But when Mark died in that car accident, the truth became impossible to ignore. My family didn't mourn him. They mourned the inconvenience of his death. At the funeral, my mother complained that the humidity was ruining her hair. My father asked about the life insurance payout before the dirt was even settled on the grave. They didn't see a grieving widow. They saw an unmonitored bank account. Lying in that hospital bed, the anesthesia finally clearing from my system, I realized that cutting them off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a correction. For years, the ledger of our relationship had been bleeding red. I had given everything: money, time, loyalty, and received nothing but demands in return. I wasn't looking for vengeance. I was looking for equilibrium. And in my world, you don't carry bad debt. You write it off. Since they were bankrupt in both finance and morality, foreclosure was the only option left. I went home 4 days later. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. I had hired a nanny, a calm, capable woman named Elena, using the money I would have sent to my parents. Elena didn't complain. She didn't ask for favors. She just cared for Liam and Lucas while I rested. It was the first time in years I had paid for help and actually received it. For 3 days, my phone was silent. I kept the block active, preserving my peace like a fragile ecosystem. But on the 4th day, curiosity got the better of me. I unblocked them, just for a moment. The notifications hit my phone like a landslide. 57 missed calls, 82 text messages. They weren't worried. They were rabid. I scrolled through the wall of text, my eyes scanning for keywords like surgery, hospital, or okay. There were none. Instead, I saw declined, embarrassing, ungrateful. Fix this. My mother had left a voice note. I pressed play, my stomach tightening. Her voice was shrill, echoing with the particular acoustics of a marble bathroom, probably hiding from her friends at the club. "Sophia, you ungrateful girl, do you have any idea what you've done?" The card was declined. Declined! At the Gala bar, in front of the Commodore. Your father had to ask a friend to cover our tab. We have never been so humiliated. You embarrassed us on purpose. Fix this immediately. Transfer the money now, or don't bother coming to Sunday dinner. I replayed it. Declined. That was the tragedy. Not my surgery. Not my near-death experience. But the declined card at the open bar. Then came the texts from my father. "You think you're clever? Cutting us off like this? That money is ours. We earned it raising you. You're punishing us for having a life. Selfish. And Alexa, Mom is crying in her room. Dad is throwing things. I hope you're happy. You ruined the gala. They weren't sorry. They were inconvenienced. They weren't concerned about my health. They were concerned about their liquidity. The realization washed over me, cold and finalizing. There was no misunderstanding here. There was no communication breakdown. They understood perfectly. They just didn't care. They viewed my survival as secondary to their social standing. I didn't reply. I didn't engage. I screenshotted every message, every threat, every time-stamped proof of their priorities. Then I reblocked them. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought I was playing a game of chicken, waiting for them to apologize so I would open the wallet again. They didn't realize I had already left the table. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was preparing for war. Because people like Richard and Cynthia don't go quietly. They don't learn lessons. They escalate. And when they realized the ATM was permanently out of order, they would come for the only thing I had left that they could leverage. My children. I needed to be ready. The next morning, I made the call I had been dreading but knew was necessary. Grace picked up on the second ring. Grace was a hospital social worker I'd known since college. She dealt with crisis for a living, broken families, custody disputes, the ugly side of human nature. She was the only person I trusted to navigate the minefield I was walking into. "Sophia?" she said, her voice warm but cautious. "I heard about the surgery. Are you okay?" "I'm recovering," I said. "But I need your professional help. Not as a friend. As a consultant." I explained everything. The surgery, the refusal, the cutoff, the escalation. When I finished, the silence on the other end was heavy. "Okay," Grace said finally. "This isn't just a family dispute, Sophia. This is financial abuse. And if they're as desperate as they sound, they're going to try to regain control. Custody," she said, confirming my worst fear. "They'll claim you're unstable, that the surgery affected your judgment, that you're unfit because you're isolating the children. We need to get ahead of this." We spent the next week building a fortress. Grace helped me organize my finances, separating every account, changing every password, ensuring there wasn't a single digital thread connecting me to them. We documented every text, every voicemail, creating a timeline of their negligence. It stopped being about hurt feelings. It became a forensic accounting of their failure as parents. We pulled bank records going back 5 years. We itemized every gift I had given them, the boat payments, the acting classes, the condo fees. The total was staggering. Over $100,000. Money that should have gone into the twins' college fund. Money that should have secured our future. Seeing it in black and white, a spreadsheet of my own exploitation, hardened something inside me. I wasn't just a daughter they had mistreated. I was an investor they had defrauded. "Grace," I said, staring at the final tally, "they're going to come for me. They're going to realize the money is gone forever, and they're going to panic. Let them come," Grace said, her voice steely. "You have the records. You have the truth. And more importantly, you have legal standing. They have nothing but entitlement." We drafted a formal cease and desist letter, just in case. We prepared emergency custody documents naming Grace as the temporary guardian. If anything happened to me, explicitly excluding my parents, I was fortifying my life. I was building a wall, brick by brick, document by document. And as I worked, the fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp determination. They had used my love as a weapon against me. Now, I was using the law as a shield. But even with all our preparation, we missed one thing. One small, devastating detail buried in the paperwork that would change everything. It was raining again the day Grace found it. A steady, relentless drizzle that blurred the Seattle skyline into a watercolor of grays. She was sitting at my dining table, surrounded by stacks of paper insurance documents, bank statements, old tax returns. "Sophia," she said. Her voice was quiet, Too quiet. I looked up from my laptop. What is it? I thought you said Mark's life insurance policy lapsed. It did, I said, the old grief pricking at my throat. We missed a payment the month before the accident. We were tight on cash because of the boat loan for my dad. It lapsed. There was no payout. Grace slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a premium payment record. Recent. It didn't lapse, she said. Someone kept paying it. I stared at the document. The policy number was correct. The name was correct. But the payment source wasn't Mark. It was a joint account. Richard and Cynthia, my parents. I don't understand, I said, my mind struggling to make the leap. Why would they pay for Mark's policy? Look at the beneficiary change form, Grace said, pointing to a second document. Dated 2 weeks after the funeral. I looked. There, in my mother's distinct, looping handwriting, was the change request. The primary beneficiary had been switched from Sophia to Richard and Cynthia. The room seemed to tilt. They kept it active, I whispered. They paid the premiums for 3 years. Secretly, and named themselves the beneficiaries, Grace added, her face grim. Sophia, think about what this means. They were telling you they were broke. They were taking $3,000 a month from you for condo fees. But they had enough money to pay the premiums on a policy that only pays out if. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. If I died, the surgery, the refusal to come, the rest they needed for the gala, it wasn't just negligence. It was a wager. They knew I was going into emergency surgery. They knew the risks. And they chose not to be there. They chose not to help. Because if something went wrong, if the internal bleeding hadn't stopped, if I hadn't woken up, they wouldn't just be free of their burden. They would be rich. They were betting on my death. I felt bile rise in my throat. I ran to the bathroom and dry heaved over the sink, my body physically rejecting the revelation. All the times they called me a nuisance, all the times they demanded money, they were waiting. They were maintaining an investment, waiting for it to mature. I washed my face with cold water, staring at the woman in the mirror. She looked pale, shaken, but her eyes were different. The last shred of doubt, the tiny, lingering voice that said maybe they just don't know how to love, was gone, dead. They weren't just bad parents. They were monsters. And monsters don't get mercy. They get exterminated. I walked back out to the dining room. Grace was watching me, worry etched into her features. Are you okay? She asked. No, I said. My voice was ice. But I know what I have to do. I picked up the documents. The evidence of their bet. They want a payout? I said. I'm going to give them one. It took 3 weeks for the house of cards to collapse. Without my monthly contributions, the foreclosure notice didn't just knock. It kicked the door down. I heard through the grapevine a frantic call from my aunt, who I hadn't blocked, that they were being evicted. The condo was gone. The boat was repossessed. The gala tickets were a distant memory. It was raining again the day they showed up. I was in the kitchen, feeding the twins, when I saw their car pull up. It wasn't the luxury SUV they used to lease. It was a rental, small and cheap. They walked up the path to my modest rental house. They looked smaller, older. My mother's hair wasn't perfectly coiffed. It was frizzy from the damp. My father's shoulders were slumped. They didn't look like the titans of the yacht club anymore. They looked like what they were, broke, desperate people. I opened the door before they could knock. I didn't invite them in. I stood on the threshold, blocking the warmth of my home from the chill of their reality. Sophia, my mother said. Her voice cracked. Please. It's raining. I know, I said. What do you want? We're losing everything, my father said. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual arrogance. The bank took the condo. We have nowhere to go. We're family, Sophia. You can't let us live in a motel. Family, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. Like when I was bleeding in the ER? Like when you bet on my life expectancy? They froze. My father's face went gray. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. I held up the folder Grace had prepared. The policy, Dad. The premiums. The beneficiary change. I tossed the folder onto the wet porch steps. It landed with a heavy slap. You didn't want a daughter? I said, my voice steady and cold. You wanted a payout. Well, here it is. That's the evidence of insurance fraud. I sent a copy to the investigator this morning. Sophia, no, my mother wailed, reaching out. We were just securing our future. You bet against mine, I said, and then it happened. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment I thought would feel like triumph. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like relief. Deep, physical relief. I felt a snap in my chest, a literal sensation, like a heavy, rusted anchor chain finally breaking under the tension. The weight that had been dragging behind me for 33 years, the guilt, the obligation, the desperate need for their approval, it just detached. It fell away, sinking into the dark water, leaving me floating. Free. I looked at them, shivering in the rain, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I felt nothing. They were strangers. Wet, pathetic strangers. You should go, I said. Before the police arrived to take your statements. Sophia, please, my father begged, tears mixing with the rain on his face. We're your parents. No, I said. You're just people I used to know. I stepped back and closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. And it was the most beautiful. 6 months later, the rain in Seattle finally stopped. The sun came out, weak and watery, but it was there. I was sitting in the backyard of my new rental house, a small place with a big garden that needed work. Liam and Lucas were digging in the dirt, their hands brown and happy. They didn't ask about their grandparents anymore. Kids are resilient. They know who shows up. Grace showed up. Elena showed up. And most importantly, I showed up. I had a letter in my hand from the insurance company. Their fraud investigation was complete. Richard and Cynthia were facing charges. The district attorney was involved. It was a mess, a legal tangle that would take years to unravel. But it wasn't my mess. I walked over to the fire pit I'd built in the corner of the yard. I struck a match and held it to the corner of the envelope. I watched the flame catch, watched the paper curl and blacken, watched the official letterhead turn to ash. It wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral for the last vestige of my old life. People tell you that cutting off family is the worst thing you can do. They say blood is thicker than water. They say you'll regret it, that you'll be lonely. But they don't tell you the other part. They don't tell you that a garden can't grow if you don't prune the dead branches. It hurts to cut them. It feels like you're hurting the tree. But those dead branches aren't just ugly. They're blocking the light. They're sucking energy that should be going to new growth. And if you leave them there long enough, the rot spreads until the whole tree dies. I pruned my garden. I cut deep. I cut until I bled. But looking at my boys playing in the sun, listening to the quiet hum of a life built on truth instead of obligation, I knew I had made the right choice. My tree was scarred, yes, but for the first time in 33 years, it was growing towards the light. And the view was magnificent. If you've ever had to prune your own garden to save your peace, share this story. You never know who needs permission to let go today.